All right, so what I'd like to do is give you an idea of what we're going to do since we already did the intro here. So, as you can see, and as you may have read, Djann Hoffman has an amazing collection. So I'm not even going to attempt to go there. I'm going to let him talk about it. And what we're going to do is start with Djann talking a little bit about his collection, the history of how he came upon this collection, and then what we're going to do is a modified tea ceremony. Naoko is going to serve, and we're going to have a spot for 2 people to do the actual tea ceremony, and then everybody else gets tea too, but in a less formal way. So thank you again for coming, really appreciate it, and love seeing you all here on Tuesday. And thank you, Djann.
It's so nice to be back. This is a repeat performance, and it was really fun last time. So a lot of new faces, that's great. This tea ceremony, just before I start talking about the stuff of it, these benches were designed in 1880 by a guy named Djann, who was the Grand Master of the Urasenki Tea School. In 1880 was the first time Japan opened its doors to an international art exposition. It was art and industry, actually. And so it was the first time Westerners were actually invited into the country. And this guy recognized that Westerners weren't going to be able to sit in seiza on a mat without hurting themselves badly. And so he designed a tea, it's called rirai, and it's on stools and served on little tables, so the Westerners don't have to hurt themselves. So that's what we're going to do later. And I started studying the tea ceremony at San Francisco Zen Center in Green Gulch in probably the late 80s. And I've been attending the Zen Center, Zen teachings for many years, and I actually got very interested in the tea ceremony. And it's very unlike me because it's got so many rules, and I really am not a rule guy. But I love the stuff of it. I noticed that I really liked the pottery. And in Japan, that's called dogu. And so I started taking tea ceremony at Green Gulch, and at the time I had a business in San Francisco, the whole area around San Francisco, a courier service. And so I spent my time driving all over the Bay Area. Turns out there are hundreds of little stores, secondhand stores and Asian art galleries and stuff like that around there. And so I was in the perfect place to get stuff. And I started getting stuff. And so that it was probably 30 years of collecting before we left in '06 to come back to New Mexico. And this is part of the result. I realized that there are something like over 50 pieces that are in this show. Most of them are connected with tea ceremony. The bowls, obviously. Last month, the guy asked me, well, what does it take to have a tea bowl? And I answered him shortly. And one of the things is you have to be able to handle it. You have to be able to get your fingers underneath it so you can serve it to your guest. One of the things is you'll see later that you use a whisk to mix the tea. And the tea is powdered green tea. It's the first picking of the tea leaves in the spring. And they dry it and powder it, and it's called matcha. And which is unlike the steeped tea that you often see around the leaves. This is powdered. And it's a bright green color, and it's all fresh and it's beautiful. And so color has something to do with the tea bowls also. And so the Japanese tea masters liked tea bowls that really showed off this bright green color. And this particular bowl probably came from China. It's probably 800 or 900 years old. We think Sung Dynasty. And it's a celadon. In Japan, it's called seiji. The green and brown glazes, they're all celadons, and they vary from colors like this, gray-green to bright green and blue. And this is kind of right in the middle, and it's a little odd because it's not very shiny. And most of the celadon glazes are shiny. But this has, to me, I love this shape, and it's very subtly carved on the bottom into a lotus shape. And the joke I kept telling last time was, and I found it in a secondhand store. And again, I found it in a secondhand store. I'll do talk about a couple of the tea bowls. This one, the bigger tea bowls are mostly used in a kind of tea ceremony where the tea is mixed thicker. It's the same tea, except you don't have as much liquid in it. It's actually the consistency of gruel. For that kind of tea ceremony, you often share the bowl with 3 or 4 people. And so you pass the bowl on, and the next person will take a drink. This tea ceremony is called a thin tea, or usa cha, and everybody gets their own bowl. And generally you drink the tea in 3 sips, and it's okay to slurp the last one. It's perfectly acceptable. And you can drink it all. And so this bowl is it's made by an amateur, I'm sure. No professional would. Well, there's kind of a funny thing that happens. When the potters get really, really good in Japan, they can start making pots that look like a 6-year-old made. And so that's become a master, I think. And anyway, so I love the color of this. This is a raku bowl. It's a red raku bowl, and it's decorated with like finger marks of white, and probably for cherry or plum blossoms. And here, another kind of bowl. There are 88 tea ceremonies in the Urasenke tradition, which I studied. Naoko, who's going to be doing the tea, studies in the Mushana-Koji Senke tradition, which is slightly different, and I don't know how. I mean, over 500 years that the tea ceremony's been going on, some things have changed, but not very many. It's like the color of the bowl they'll use, or maybe they use a slightly bigger bowl, or this. This is the tea container. So maybe those could be, instead of black or red or lacquered, they could be a clear color like this, but real subtle stuff. It's hard to get anything to change. This particular bowl came from China, and it's used in a more formal tea ceremony. Same tea, same mixie, and often has a little stand that the bowl sits on. This particular bowl is called a temoku bowl, and it's named after the dark brown glaze. And this particular kind, this is called hare's fur glaze, because when it gets hot enough in the kiln, this glaze starts to run, and it looks like the fur of a rabbit. And so it's a particular kind, and it was highly prized in China. And the Japanese tea masters liked it, so they brought it to Japan. It's a slightly more formal tea ceremony. They vary all the way from what they call the wabi-sabi tea ceremonies. Wabi actually means plain, sort of dry, kind of gray, not expressive, inner. And then at the other end of the tea ceremony spectrum, there is the one that is only given to the emperor, and it's all gold utensils. And I never bothered to learn that, because I probably won't meet the emperor. So there's all kinds of ceremonies. This is another Chinese dish. And what they would do for this one, this is this tomoku glaze, this dark iron-rich glaze. They dip a leaf in a white glaze and lay it in the bowl. And when it's fired, of course, the leaf burns, but the glaze remains. And these got very popular. This is probably not the Japanese made copies of these. This is probably a Chinese. What else do I want to say about tea bowls? The collection has a lot of tea bowls, chawan, in it. There are quite a few different kinds. This one again was used in the thick tea ceremony because it's bigger. This is made by a peasant Korean potter, and they made these by the hundreds. And they would stack them on the burros and send them to the market. And this particular white, this is a celadon glaze again, but it's kind of gray. And this particular white was put on there with a big, thick, heavy brush made out of a piece of brushwood or whatever anybody found around. And it's called flying white in the lexicon because you can kind of see through it. And this one's been chipped and repaired. You know, there've been a lot of wars in the last, there's a lot of action in Japan in the last 500 years. And so these old bowls are really lucky to have made it. And that the Japanese style of repairing a bowl like this, they will use gold lacquer and not try to hide the fact that it's repaired. This has just got a little chip out of the edge. And but even if the bowl is cracked into 20 pieces, it can be repaired, and you'll see little lines of gold lacquer. And I find this beautiful. So, and tea came to America at some point, probably in the Chicago Exposition in the 1920s, maybe. This bowl is made by probably the most famous American potter who makes teaware, a guy named Warren Mackenzie's in Minnesota. And this is a style that he's modified slightly. This is, again, this sort of Korean look style. Has these high sides with the everted lip. He's a very prolific potter. He's in Minnesota, he's still alive, he's 93, so he's still making pots. And he made another one over here. One here. This is another Korean pot. This is probably a couple hundred years old. And this cross on the bottom, what they used to do is make these pots and they'd stack them on top of each other and put them on burros. And they used these crosses to tie them on. These were cut for ropes. So you'd see a burro, whatever a Korean word for a burro is, going along with these piles of pots going out. So Warren Mackenzie, more thing about him. This is a Mackenzie Mizuzashi. It's a water jar for the cold water for the tea ceremony, and that's what she's going to be taking her cold water out of to replenish the water that she makes the tea with. And he's gone and developed over the years what I consider a beautiful Shino glaze. This is a Japanese, it's called Shino, Japanese means white. And American Shinos has gotten a little oranger, and his glazes have even got these beautiful little, if I wiggle it just right, you can see the shine. These little crystals in them. When tea came to America, well, a lot of people, I have not been able to make a good tea bowl. And I've been making pottery for 30 or 40 years, and I just, even though I know them, and I know how to handle them, it's just never quite right. So there are some American potters who I think have made acceptable tea bowls. One is a woman named Jenny Land, who died a few years ago, unfortunately, lived in Santa Fe. She and some other American potters actually published a book called Tea Bowls. And I think that they got as close as anybody in America to. And hers is like off the reservation for Japanese. It's got these funny figures of Ganesha on the side. And let's see. I'm going to talk about one more tea bowl over here. Okay, so this is another Song Dynasty creation, which we put it in the anywhere from 900 to 1100. And this one's been around, and it's been bounced off the floor a few times. The bottom of it is like really worn. So somehow this pot made it for 900 years without serious damage. And again, it's this Tomoku glaze. It's very dark. It's iron rich. And if it doesn't have quite so much iron in it, it'll fire brown. So I love the fruit of this. And again, this is something that was made in China that the Japanese tea masters began to like. And so they started, around 1500s, they started asking potters in Japan to make tea bowls like they wanted. And in fact, Japan invaded Korea at one point in the 1500s and actually brought back whole villages of potters. And they're still there in Japan. I'm not sure if they liked it at first, but they seem to have stayed. This, like I say, I brought a few American pieces. This is made by an old friend of mine in New Mexico, Amy Cheney, and it's made from micaceous clay, which is a low-fire clay that has little flecks of mica in it. You can see the glitter. And then this is fired in a campfire. And takes about an hour to fire a piece like this. And they aren't waterproof, but they can be sealed and used for tea. Now this could almost be used for tea because you can almost grab it. And but it'd be hard. Let's see what else we got here. So most of the pieces I got over the years didn't have boxes. Good pottery in Japan, whether it's made, whether we know who made it or whether it's been collected and saved and used as a good piece of pottery, has a box. And on the box, they write about the bowl. And so this probably says frog teacup. And it may have the name of the potter or where they're from or something like that. And I found this one with the box. It has a lovely frog in it. And this is a teacup size. This is used for drinking the brewed tea rather than the matcha tea. This is called a yinomi. And there's a slightly smaller cup called the guinomi, which is more often used for drinking sake. And that's for people who really like sake, and then there are the little sake cups for people who like to taste sake. Anyway, so this has a lovely frog on it, and a poem. And I haven't been able to find anybody who's actually been able to decipher the poem. One of these days, somebody will. But I always think of it as the Basho poem about Plop, the frog in the pond. Sound of the frog in the pond. Anyway, so as I say, most of the stuff I find didn't have boxes. And in order to get a box for a pot, basically you have to go back to find the lineage of the potter that made it and have one of his students or her students attest, there aren't too many hers, attest that this was really a pot made by Hamada Shoji or somebody, or the raku masters. And it's very difficult to, speaking of students, this pot right here could be used as a flower vase, a haniere, a flower container, like this one. These are always part of the tea ceremony. They always have a flower arrangement. This was made by a man named Shimaoka Tetsuo, who was the first student of a very famous Japanese potter named Hamada Shoji. And Hamada Shoji was made in Japanese National Treasure in 1955. And it's, see, in the U.S. we don't respect potters like that, but there is a great deal of respect for artists and craftspeople in Japan, and they started naming a few of them every few years Japanese national treasures, living national treasures, while they were still alive. This guy actually did become a national treasure in the 90s. He died just a few years ago. Hamada died in the 70s, I believe. So he's in the lineage. And if I found, well, I have found, in fact, I have found a Hamada pot. We know this is made by Hamada. Shoji, we think in the 60s. And this one has been seen by Mr. Shimaoka and verbally he's testified that this is one of Hamada's personal pots. And this one is, again, we have this iron thick glaze. This probably could be used as a water jar for tea ceremony, but it'd be a push. It's so big. It could be a nice vase also. Hamada's work was almost all crooked. And there's a joke about it. He came to San Jose in the 60s and was giving a workshop on pots. And this woman asked him, well, why can't you make a straight pot? You know? And he said to the woman, and this is apocryphal, that I've been training myself for 30 years to make crooked pots, and I'm not going to start making straight pots just for you. So he made crooked pots. And this was his painting. This was his sort of signature painting. And early in his career, he looked out the window and saw a field of barley that had just been hit by a cyclone. And the barley was just smashed all over. So he started doing this painting. He would often paint this on his pots. This is another, I think, a Hamada pot. It's as yet unidentified. Earlier in his career, he used that same painting. But it's written by his people who have studied him that he used a lot more strokes earlier in his career. So this is a later thing. I think this is an unidentified Hamada pot from the 30s when he went back to Japan. Hamada studied with a guy named Bernard Leach in England for probably 5 or 6 years during the 20s. And they were all about recreating the old Song Dynasty glazes, these celadon glazes. And Leach was he was a very popular potter, and they were instrumental in sort of restoring pottery to an art form rather than a peasant action. This is a persimmon. This is also one of his favorite paintings, and it's gorgeous. The other reasons I think that possibly this was a Hamada pot was the angle of the foot. And he and his students and Leach and the people of that school almost always cut the foot in like this instead of it being straight down. Also, Hamada made these kind of pots by throwing the first half as a bowl shape and letting it dry overnight, and then he'd throw the top half and put it together. And if you look closely into the inside of this, you can see that it's been luted together on the inside. So these are all the things that go through the crazed collector's mind. I have some mystery pots. This is a mystery pot. I love the shape. In Japan, it's called apple shape, or gunrin, I think. Is that the right word? Again, it's an iron-rich glaze. This is almost black. This clay is purple, and someday I'll find out where this came from. It only has this one little Ichi mark on it. This one, it looks to me like it had a lid on it for its life, because it's just slightly worn at the top. Somebody kept vinegar or something in there. But I really like the shape of this. A couple of these pots I got in the same store in Berkeley over the years. And the stores I go into, they obviously didn't know often what they had. And it turns out that the Oakland Museum had the best collection of contemporary Japanese pottery in the U.S. Up until 1970, and then they voted to become a California museum, and they sold it all. And so I've actually found over the years some pieces with the museum marks on them that were collected back in the day. If any of them are here. Okay, so tea bowls, that's tea bowls. These are, as I say, mizuzashi. They're called cold water jars. This one's probably from the 1700s. It's the style is called mishima. Again, it came from Korea, and the potter would use a little stamp and stamp all these little flowers and things on the side, and then he'd paint the whole thing white, and then scrape the white off. So what you're left with are the designs. This was then fired to quite a high temperature, probably for 9 days or 11 days or something like that. And it is again the celadon glaze, but look at these beautiful colors, this plum color stripe in here and this the gray-green. We can see that it probably was fired as a tea ceremony water jar because it had a lid, and it was attached with these little lugs. Generally, the lids get broken, so they're replaced, or people have made black lacquer lids for it. So a pot may come with its box and its original box, maybe, and then some collector is going to go, oh, this is a really valuable pot, I'm going to make another box for it. So they find some tea master or sign their name to it and attest that it's a really good pot. And then they'll make a lid for it. So now it has 2 lids. So sometimes these pieces end up with 3 or 4 boxes, and all attested. This is another style of mizuzashi. This is made in the Djann kilns. And they don't use glazes. They fire these at very high temperatures for long periods of time. And these are called years. And this is, and their pieces are often warped or intentionally warped. And just the way that the Djann kilns have fired these things for now 300 or 400 years. This I bought at a yard sale in Oakland. Who knows? I showed you that one. The box thing. There is also a sake ceremony, and I like the sake ceremony very well. And there has been an argument going on in the tea world for literally hundreds of years between the sake people and the not sake people. And the tea people say, oh, sake is barbarian, we don't want to have that in the tea ceremony. But then there's the other side and say, well, you need sake in the tea ceremony just to survive, sitting on your knees for an hour. And so anyway, this again was made in the Djann kiln by, I think this fellow also became a living national treasure. His name is Kaneshiji Toyo. And his father was a living national treasure. And I bought it in this box. And this is a Djann box, but it's the wrong putter. So at some point during this, and we know that it was sold at Sotheby's in New York in the early 60s, because there's some stamps on it that we identified. But somehow the box and the pot got juxtaposed. And I got that beautiful little sake jar at the same store that we bought this sake cup. And this is a good example of somebody who's reached masterhood and now can make a cup like a 6-year-old. It's kind of crooked. Here, but this is its real box. And it's signed and it's got his mark on the bottom. This it's in the same store, and it came through the same sale in Sotheby's in New York. And so I was lucky enough to be able to grab both of those at the time. And this what looks like glaze on here, as I said, these end people didn't use any glaze. This is wood ash that's melted in the kiln and then landed again on the cup, and it's now shiny. and makes it glaze. But these particular pots, the Bizin pots, are fired for so long and so high that they are impervious. They are vitrified, so they are impervious to water. Unlike that little dish over there that will soak up water. This one wasn't. I didn't bring this one for the last show, but it left off the shelf at me as I was packing up, and it's a. I didn't have anything else from. Where's this from? Well, anyway, they're noted. The kiln is noted for big runny blazes in the ash that's all over the side. I'll think of the name of this in a minute. This, again, I bought it at a garage sale, and it was new. It turns out that this pot and a number of, well, 3 or 4 of the others in the collection, that one, the Karatsu water jar there, and well, I believe 3 or 4 of the pots had been part of a gallery in San Francisco. It was down on Union Square back in the early 80s. And it closed and the pots disappeared. Anyway, I brought that one because I like it. And I'm getting time signals. So let's just see what I want to say. I love this stuff, and all my Zen teaching for all the years has said, well, you got to keep giving stuff away. You got to get rid of this stuff, but it never took. So this is what we have. I'd just like to finally thank Koji-san, who was the person who came to our house and began to and noticed some of this pottery, and asked me if we could come up here and show it. And I really thank you very much, because it's just been a great honor and so much fun for me. And thank you. And I think we're getting ready to do tea. Daniela, would you like to be a guest?
Yes, please.
And
That's her birthday.
it's her birthday.
It's her birthday.
And so you can take this right here. And is there anybody that would really like to be a guest? Come on, be brave. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It's really simple. We coach you. All right, eat your sweet. So you can sit down. And Malco is going to come in and do this rear-eye tea ceremony. It's rare, but sometimes all the pieces of the dogu for a tea ceremony match. Doesn't happen very often. And it's to me kind of like the kimono. There are always 4 or 5 different designs. And so part of the art of the person who's doing the tea is to pick the ones that feel and signify what you want to demonstrate. And the idea of a tea ceremony is to have a heart-to-heart connection between the host and the guest, and to experience beauty. So that's what we're doing. And thank you so much for your dance.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Azuki bean.
Azuki bean.
Azuki bean. And mochi.
Oh,
Nice.
I get some liquor.
Nice.